So we know that Shakespeare wrote about them, and even Jesus mentions them in the Bible. So when did people actually start believing in ghosts? So most people think that in order to have a belief in ghosts, it requires a couple things from us. We have to know the difference between life and death. We have to be able to think in the abstract and be able to kind of visualize what happens after death. And a belief in religion doesn't hurt either. So when did these abilities show up in the human record, and when is the earliest we could have believed in ghosts? So modern humans have been around for about 300,000 years, and our buddies the Neanderthals were here from about 400,000 years ago to about 40,000 years ago. There is evidence that Neanderthals buried their dead, and some evidence that they may have done some rituals with that. But that's very hotly debated in the scientific community. We know that modern humans were doing ritual burials about 100,000 years ago because 15 individuals were found in a cave in Israel. They were buried, but they were also buried with rocks covered in ochre, which seems to indicate some sort of ritualistic thing happening there. So the possibility exists that even 100,000 years ago, people were thinking about the afterlife and what happens in the afterlife and what happens if you come back from the afterlife. By far the best evidence we have that people believed in ghosts is when they wrote it down. Unfortunately, humans didn't really figure out writing until about 3,500 BCE, and it was started in Sumeria with cuneiform writing. The oldest story that we have written down is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there are pieces of that are as old as 2000 BCE, but we know that the story and the most complete version were finished in about 700 BCE. It's the oldest piece of literature that we have found anywhere on the planet, and guess what? That's right, there is a ghost in it. And we can assume that the person that wrote the story didn't just make up ghosts. The belief in ghosts had been around before that story was written down. In 2021, a scientist named Irving Finkel at the British Museum made a discovery in their Mesopotamian collection. He found a tablet that was from about 1500 BCE, and it actually describes a ritual to get ghosts back to the underworld. You're supposed to make a male and female figurine. It involves some beer and some sunrise prayers, and it gets that ghost out of your house. But in this tablet, there is actually a picture of a male ghost being led back to the underworld by a female. So we know that 3,500 years ago, people in Mesopotamia had a belief in ghosts and had figured out how to get them back into the underworld. From there, we just have more and more examples of ghosts throughout history. There's a ghost in Homer's Odyssey, which was written in about 700 BCE. The Romans were writing about a ghost. She was supposedly summoned by a jilted wife to kill the wife's husband. They were writing about that between 9 and 30 CE. And in the 1st century, Pliny the Younger actually wrote a letter to one of the Roman senators describing in detail the haunting of a house in his neighborhood. In China, we have a ghost story that originates in about 800 BCE, and we know that the Aborigines in Australia have a deep-rooted belief in ghosts and spirits, and they're believed to be one of the oldest cultures on Earth. In fact, it's widely believed that every culture in the world has a belief in ghosts or spirits. So we may not know for sure when the belief in ghosts started, but we can be very sure that ghosts have been with us for a very long time.